it's like a clash on the inside between an instinct and a complex, basically. And the ego sits in the middle of it, the conscious mind going, ah, what's going on? But the signal is an invitation to resolve it. Hey Yuliya.
Hi James.
And hello guys. So we'd like to have a chat about anxiety today, as anxiety is an affliction involving the psyche that seems to be a very common reason for someone to consult a mental health professional or look up self-development resources online. It really does seem to be absolutely everywhere these days, doesn't it?
That's true. And if you look online on the internet, every second or third person, also celebrities coming out as having anxiety and or depression. And in real life, I know a lot of people who seem to be having these problems nowadays, and it's just something that is so common that it seems like this problem is either becoming bigger or more people discover what it is, or something else is going on.
Yeah, it does seem to be absolutely everywhere. And I don't think these political conditions, lockdowns and stuff like that, exactly lend themselves in the favour of removing anxiety.
Oh, no.
I think they would only encourage such a thing. But the interesting thing, and I first got into this a few years ago, on my own self-development journey, and I came to understand what the modern, we'll just say, psychological academy believes about the state of anxiety as, say, a mental health condition. There seems to be an idea that anxiety is simply a leftover evolutionary artifact from the deep, deep Paleolithic past when we were cavemen running around the savannah, where in those days we'd be very much scared of being eaten by a lion or other such predators coming to get us. But these days, because we don't have predators, we now have homework and mortgages and whatever, that leftover circuitry signals. So, in other words, it's neurotic right at core. That we believe that there's a lion walking around trying to get us. That seems to be the modern understanding of it. And therefore, it's just an imbalance in the brain, or someone getting too stressed about something. I don't like that at all.
So,
I don't know what you think about that.
So is it like people nowadays perceive everyday challenges as symbol of a lion back in the days that was threatening their lives?
Yes, it's like an evolutionary artifact that will then go off on modern challenges instead. And I really don't like that approach at all.
It sounds like the magnitude of something like a homework or a mortgage would be similar to losing one's life.
That's it. That's
where I have questions to this theory.
Yeah, there's questions in evolutionary psychology, there's questions in phylogenetics, evolutionary biology, molecular biology, all over the place as to what? It seems like that's a hypothesis and nothing more. So I don't like that very much. You know, I'm being mentored by Steve and Pauline Richards at the Institute for Psychosystems Analysis, and through working with those two guys, I've learned a great deal about anxiety. I've learned a great deal about how to treat it quickly and effectively, both in myself, which I've been very open with on the YouTube channel, and in other people as well, patients, friends, stuff like that. So I really think the first question with stuff like this is to define what anxiety is. Because if you talk to different people, they seem to have a different idea. Like some people say they're worriers. You know, they like to worry about things. Or, am I going to get the kids to school on time on the school run? Or will they have the food that I want in Tesco when I get there? Or have I wasted my journey? Something. Sort of a worrying sense. Other people have more existential dread. You know, other people have phobias, whatever. On the surface, they all seem to be very, very different. But I don't know if you agree, Yuliya. I think the first important point is to define exactly what's going on in each individual person, rather than just call it anxiety and then treat it as a leftover evolutionary artifact.
Absolutely, because what I see, especially on the internet where people post their stories, is because it's right there available for everyone to see, right? Is that a lot of times when someone goes with this problem to a doctor, they are going to be prescribed medications.
Anxiolytic drugs, yeah.
Yeah, saying that, oh, it just probably happens to be a chemical imbalance, which is, I'm not sure in how many cases it is true, but I assume in less cases than what doctors say it to be.
Well, I mean, there's an immediate problem with the chemical imbalance hypothesis straight away, because anxiety is a clear and distinct signal. If there was a chemical imbalance, we're talking about entropy. And if there was entropy, then you wouldn't have a refined experience as an evolutionary artifact. Nothing of the sort.
Yeah, and if it was a chemical imbalance, it would be safe to assume that third of a population walks around with being damaged to some extent and unable to be a normal and healthy person on their own.
Yeah.
Which doesn't sound exactly healthy and adaptive to me.
No. So I don't think that hypothesis holds water. And to throw, sometimes an anxiolytic drug, it's like I don't want to even make any comments around that. That's not my area of expertise at all. But there is something certainly common underneath a state of anxiety, and it doesn't matter what the expression of that is. Some people have phobias. That's a common thing for someone to consult a therapist about. Fear of heights, fear of spiders, or so-called agoraphobia, fear of the outside world, stuff like that. Then you've also got free-floating anxiety too, where someone's just seemingly got a fight or flight response, so called, so described, and they don't know where it comes from, and it's deeply unpleasant. But normally when anxiety comes on, when people really sit down and describe it to you, and one can feel in themselves, is it's simply an unpleasant arousal state. That's what's common across all of them, right? It's like there's like a freeze and a desire to run away.
Yeah, and what I heard multiple times is that by being in this state without understanding what's the reason for it is, people tend to criticize themselves, saying that there's something wrong with them and they don't know why everyone seems to be walking around cheerful and happy and doing their business, but they just feel frightened and anxious all the time, which is, it's really sad. It's really sad because it seems like to some extent anxiety nowadays is popularized, as it's quite normal to have anxiety.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but on another hand, it's as if when people have it, it seems like they're the only ones going through that experience, and they think that there's something very wrong with them, which is very sad to see.
That's true. We got to bear in mind suggestion and what suggestion can do. I think that leads us on to how us at IPSA, under Steve and Pauline Richards, would deal with such a thing. So if there's something common across them, all different types of anxiety, essentially we can say that there's a signal that's being put forward. Basically, there's a signal emerging from the unconscious. In other words, one's not consciously thinking about it. It just presents itself. And it could be in relation to an object. So, for example, a phobia, right? That's just a projection out onto an object of that which is causing fear. Or it could have no object hook at all. It could just be an arousal state that comes on. Either way, it's a signal. There's a clear, defined purpose, like a curve to each anxiety attack or panic attack. So it can't be random. So the question, therefore, almost like being Sherlock Holmes, putting your hat on, is what is the source of this signal? What is the person in question not understanding about what's going on? I think that's the most important question to ask. Once we strip away that top layer of suggestion about condition, as you were pointing out, Yuliya, I'm diseased, I have anxiety, whatever it is, because it doesn't get anybody anywhere at all.
That's true. Well, the max it can do is the person goes to a doctor and gets some anti-anxiety medications, which might help in the moment, but a lot of times what you see as well is that that doesn't resolve a problem in the long run. And I can imagine that being in this state, the last thing you want to do is to sit down and think about questions and try to find something that you're not conscious of, because you just want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But what I also found is that once you start to engage in this process of trying to discover what's underneath, it tends to calm the anxiety down.
Yes. And what one's not going to find underneath is a lion, an inner lion in a Jungian sense, snarling at them. It's not. It's going to be something much more close to home. You know, usually there's going to be some formative early experience or adaptation over time. What we would say at IPSA, broadly the Freudian stage of development, that pertaining to the family and sexuality and things like that. Or there's going to be a certain trauma that took place. Now, in either one of those examples, what the ego can do, or the conscious mind can do, is defer responsibility to dealing with it to a complex. Say, I don't want to deal with this is too scary. I'm going to give it to you to do. A complex. We've got many videos on complexes on this channel as well, including a playlist, if you guys would like to check that out. I think it'd be good. So once the ego defers responsibility to a complex, the complex then goes, okay, I'm programmed now to do what I want to do. I will now run on a circuit. And as I run on this circuit, I'm going to give you a panic attack every so often, because that's the defense mechanism to come out. That's all it is. It's a signal defense mechanism to say, you know, you don't want the anxiety, but you'd rather not have what you're really scared of. That's the riddle underneath. And again, it could have been anything. It could be fear of a parent. It could be fear of engaging in the social world. It could be any particular trauma. But the riddle underneath is saying, yeah, you'd rather have the anxiety than this though, wouldn't you?
It just seems to be in a lot of cases, the adaptation. And what's also interesting is that you pointed out very rightly there that the problem underneath is going to be something way closer to a person than some imaginable lie, because it only takes few questions to ask a person of like, what is there in everyday life, or like just try to understand their context to get an idea of what might be going on. It really doesn't take as much, and it seems like people are almost aware of what it is, but as you said, they prefer not to look. And that's where obviously a signal is coming into play in the form of anxiety. Yeah.
And I can understand at this stage why one might want to be sceptical of such a thing, and questioning stuff like this is only healthy. But this is no different really to the core premise laid out by Sigmund Freud in the 1890s. He wrote a lot about anxiety, neuroses as he called them. It's how he built his name, really. And one of the things he noticed was anxiety was almost like, and this is metaphorical of course, but it was almost like an energy. And that energy can take on different forms within the body. It can either be ejected sexually, or it could be turned into OCD. It can be turned into so-called, colloquially speaking anyway, paranoia, hysteria. It can come out, frozen body parts and spontaneous fainting and whatever. It can come out in lots of different forms. But it's like an energy field, libido, if you like. So it is personal. And it's like a clash on the inside between an instinct and a complex, basically. And the ego sits in the middle of it, the conscious mind going, what's going on? But the signal is an invitation to resolve it.
Yeah, and what I find indeed very interesting is that what people immediately think when they think about anxiety is that heart palpitations and sweaty hands, and when you feel a bit scared, when you feel anxious in general. But it's not always the way it presents. As you said, that sometimes it can hide behind different OCD behaviors, or I think even drinking could be that, when a person might go through the day all happy, adapted, seemingly so. But then they just want to drink in the evenings for seemingly no reason, right? Without experiencing that anxiety physically as people normally describe it.
Yeah. So you get a displacement into other things then of that so-called energy. I'm really happy you brought up the somatic element though, because that's a part of the psychosystems analysis model that is, first of all, indispensable to the model, and second of all, indispensable in general. And it's where a lot of modern day psychotherapists will just say fall flat on their face. Insofar as when someone's got anxiety, really, just the normal, average, individual person suffering with this, they usually have two choices. One is go to the doctor, say a medical doctor, and usually have to beg the GP to give them anxiolytics, because the GPs are usually quite reluctant to do that. Antidepressants, that's fairly easy to prescribe. Anxiolytics are a little bit harder. Or they go on a massive long waiting list, at least in England, especially now with the NHS, and talk to a counsellor. And this is normally what people are told, is it's just a thing you're going to have to live with. Why don't you try and calm down? Now, there was Mental Health Awareness Day fairly recently. I was recommended on YouTube Home, from YouTube, a playlist of videos. And one of them was dealing with anxiety and what it is. And this is from, I wouldn't say a prominent channel, but a government-funded channel. So we'll say this is where a lot of thought goes behind. The approach to dealing with anxiety is apparently don't drink coffee, don't smoke cigarettes, and get enough sleep. So is that why people are anxious? Because they're sleep deprived and chain smoking? Some people are, and they're probably not particularly anxious.
How about when you have an anxiety and you try to go to sleep, but you can't sleep because you're anxious, and then you have to work next morning, so... Well, you got to drink some coffee.
That's it. And then if someone is a smoker, it's like, well, the smoking helps them deal with the anxiety. That's one of the reasons, or one of the core reasons why they're smoking in the first place. So cut out everything good and just ignore it. And it's like, what? So that's what people are dealing with when they've got this. But you mentioned the physiological component, therefore. So with psychosystems analysis, what Steve and Pauline have done is they've examined both the biological and the psychological sides. And what they noticed was anxiety states usually are able to take hold in a person when they're exhausted or burnt out. And again, we've got a couple of videos on the channel on this too. When someone's burnt out, they're literally, but they're on, their physiology is not working optimally. So in a state like that, their psychological defense mechanisms are down. And in hypnotic fashion, really, we've known this for about 250 years, since Mesmer came on the scene, suggestion can take hold far easier. So you get a physiological state of exhaustion that then accrues psychological material to it. And then once the physiology is back to normal again, after a holiday or extended rest period, depending on how serious it was, that psychological material then remains. And it remains in the body. So you bringing that up was so important because, yes, when an anxiety attack comes on, it involves the whole of someone's physiology, but it also involves the physiology in the first place as a part of how it formed. If someone's operating normally with a healthy body, anxiety states are much harder to take root. So the first thing to do, anyone in an anxiety state, which this is something we'd recommend, would be sort out the chassis, sort out the physiology underneath. We do have a guide for that up on Gumroad, link in the description down below, called the Charing Cross method. It's something that Steve and Pauline in the early 1990s brought into primary healthcare in Charing Cross Hospital in London. And it helps you, as a grassroots method at home really, reset the physiology so that it's back to a working condition. Because how can you get rid of an anxiety state if the body is burnt out?
That's true.
That's something you don't get from like the counsellors on the front line. They ignore the body as if it's not important. And it's like, well, you couldn't be a counsellor if you didn't eat. You tried being sleep deprived and anxious and chain smoking. So could you be a counsellor then? I don't think so.
And another thing that is important to mention is sometimes when people have anxiety and they go to GP, they might be referred to a psychiatrist.
Yes.
Which sounds very serious and very scary. And why would you be referred to a psychiatrist if you didn't have some very serious mental problem?
Yeah.
Which I think is something that should be reconsidered in the primary healthcare, like as the first point of dealing with it.
Yeah, you're right. There is a huge suggestion around that, isn't
Yeah.
it? Even the term mental health. You know, there's a big push these days, and I think it's good to have more awareness around mental health. The problem then becomes the definition and what it
That's
means,
true.
and whether or not someone's broken and damaged and needs professional help. Because the suggestions around that for each individual person will vary. And anyone in an anxiety state will know that they're not in control of their thoughts. Doesn't matter what a CBT therapist says, you're not in control of your thoughts in that way. As soon as you try and chase a particular rational thought pattern down, like, oh, I'm not going to die, in a panic attack state, very common for people to believe that, especially the first one that comes on, well, then a new thought will come up. Yeah, well, maybe you're having a stroke instead of a heart attack. Then you'll chase that one down. Let's say, well, maybe it's a brain imbalance, and you'll chase that one down. It's not. The signal's not been received. Or the signal's been received, but the message hasn't been interpreted. So yeah, I think that's an important point.
Yeah, and especially since, and I think everyone knows it by now, is that simply by having an anxiety, it doesn't, it can make you very tired, and it can make very difficult to go to work and do your day-to-day
Definitely.
tasks. Seeing it as a signal is the healthiest and the most appropriate way of approaching this problem to begin with.
Yes, yeah, anxiety in and of itself is just that.
Yeah.
It's a signal. Yeah, so if we then, so what we said so far then about what it is. So first of all, we have to make it specific to each individual person. What are you experiencing? That helps scrape away suggestion. Then underneath is, okay, what's the signal? Well, the signal at one level is always going to be instinctive. I mean, take a look at phobias, for example. Heights, or predators, or the outside world, which from Steve and Pauline's experience, agoraphobia is really a fear of people in a little bit of a shifted form. But basically they're instinctive categories. So there's something emergent from the biology that's being tampered with, we'll say. Because if left to our own devices, without anything pathological in the environment, in anyone's upbringing, we'd be instinctually happy creatures, you know. But such is life, it seems, and that doesn't always happen. So first of all, it's instinctive. Now, instincts are way, 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 way deeper and more fundamental to the psyche, so where the anxiety is coming from, than complexes are. And the complex is that which is producing the anxiety, really. So if the anxiety is a clash between instinct and complex, in other words, who I want to be versus something pushing that away, again, for whatever reason, some kind of trauma when one was young, or being scared of a parent or something, whatever it is, then we want to go down to the instinct and let that instinct out. One can do that in several different ways. The most effective way, bar none, is through good, efficacious, well-crafted hypnosis, without a doubt. That's why we've got these out. The tradition of hypnosis is by far the oldest in terms of modern psychotherapeutic methods one will find on the front line. Hypnosis, in its current form anyway, goes all the way back to the 1700s. Franz Anton Mesmer discovered animal magnetism. It was a long and difficult run through many grand masters, but today hypnosis is still around and is widely known to be incredibly efficacious. Of course, the question is then why? Why would talking to someone in a mysterious way be effective? Strange thing, isn't it?
Well, that is because by utilizing hypnosis, one can bypass complexes and talk directly to the deep structures in a person's psyche.
That's it, yeah. There's something special to a trance state as its own specific state in the body, or in psychophysiology, really. And it's characterized by a state of relaxation, which is actually a state of arousal. So you've got anxiety, that's an arousal state, and relaxation, that's an arousal state. Because it is really, it's just a different hormonal profile, but you're still in a particular state. You kind of know what I mean. It's not just like a rotting, falling, nothing. You feel the hormones and the chemicals moving. So in that particular state, when it's a trance, that allows those surface structure things to be pushed aside, doesn't it? So complexes that will normally protest. So the type of things that will speak during a standard, say, CBT session or a counsellor session. I knew somebody once, and you know who they are as well, who was sent to a counsellor, and he ran rings around that counsellor. Where literally he would just sit there. He didn't want to go. He'd sit there, and the counsellor would go, "So how are you feeling this week?" He's like, "Oh, fine." "Really?" "Yeah." "Well, I guess there's nothing more I can do. Off you go then." Absolutely running rings round. And that's obviously complexes can come out. But in hypnosis, you get underneath them, down to that instinctual base of the psyche. That, therefore, is where one will find, right down there in the unconscious, by definition, the source of the anxiety. The other beautiful thing about hypnosis is one can access memories, either one that one knows that they have, but they're scary to consider, or ones that people don't remember that they have. They're put away into long-term storage, and you go about life not knowing that you have them. But hypnosis can bring these up. But with hypnosis, you don't have to feel the pain. You don't have to feel the emotion. You're in such a state put in by the hypnotherapist or by oneself when it's self-hypnosis that you can just watch. That's it. You're in a dissociative state, right? Once one sees that they have no reason to be afraid anymore of that memory, or whatever it happens to be down there in the depths of the psyche, we'll say, the complex is made redundant. And then the complex, scraped away. And that's it. That's how Steve and Pauline have dealt with anxiety disorders for the last 40 years. And it has been incredibly effective. And I know, because it's worked with me as well. And I've been very open, our students on the IPSA training course will know that as well. It really does work. Without the need for session after session after session after session for years, multiple times a week of psychoanalysis, pretty much. You can cut straight to it by saying, nope, not interested in the complexes. I'm going straight down into the psyche.
So people can deal with it by themselves if they want to.
Yes, they absolutely can.
And the first thing that you already mentioned is they can use the Charing cross method.
I think that's step one, really.
Yeah.
Fix up the physiology. If the physiology is not fixed, the psychology is going to be more likely to be all over the place, really.
Yeah. It's easier to stabilize first, and then do anything else on top if needed. And then another thing that people can use is the hypnotherapy manual.
Absolutely.
That is also available on Gumroad, where you can learn self-hypnosis yourself, and you can practice it on yourself. And the guide has all the safety guidelines in it. So what do you think about it, James?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely say Charing Cross first if one's exhausted or in a state of burnout. But then self-hypnosis is the quickest way to engage in an authentic dialectic with oneself, which one doesn't get from filling their heads with ideas. Whether that be Jungian ideas, whether that be inflationary Jungian ideas that anxiety is simply staring into the existential abyss. It's like, no, it's not. Or believing that one is broken and damaged. It's like all these suggestions they get in the way and propagate the problem. The best thing to do, authentic dialectic with oneself, definitely. The self-hypnosis manual includes everything you need to begin to do that. Everything. And there's guys in our Discord server all the time talking about their experiences with this and how when they first get their fingers twitching as a response, they're like, whoa! Because it is cool as well.
It's really cool.
Yeah, there's another thing to say though. Self-hypnosis, or hypnosis in general, is the best way to deal with an anxiety state. But if one has a through line, and by that I mean seemingly a life story when one looks at it on the surface, that was constantly over many years reinforcing these suggestions and we'll say the reasons for the anxiety being there. I mean, say for example, a more abusive or colloquially abusive household growing up, or school, I mean school in general, especially some of the ones I've known, they can be pretty horrible. Constantly giving you a reason to be fearful of anything. Doesn't matter what it is. And that might come out as a phobia or a fear of authority, which generates an anxiety response, or it might transduce into hysteria or OCD or whatever. then we have a guide called the Personal Myth Guide, Discover Your Personal Myth Ultimate Handbook. That can be employed to start sorting out one's self-concept. That's one's identity over time. Because if this thing is sitting, this complex that's creating the anxiety, or the anxiety results from its activities, is sitting right within one's identity where they can't see it, so it's unconscious by definition, then that can be a bit of a problem. It can be more difficult to see. Hypnosis can still get rid of it. But if someone watching this is suffering with an anxiety state and wishes to use a self-development approach to removing it and suspects that something like that is in their past, I'd recommend going for that, to be completely honest.
So there are multiple ways in which people can deal with anxiety. It depends on the complexity of the case and severity of the case, and also in how interested a person is in self-development and into getting all the details, because sometimes what you really want is to deal with it and have it gone and forget about it forever, and that's it. Which is possible using, well, either the first one or the second one, Charing cross or self-hypnosis methods are going to be the best for that one.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the main takeaway, I really, really think, if one wants a 1 second soundbite, really, is honestly and truthfully, the power is in your hands. Pathological suggestions one has picked up from outside sources about a state that they are experiencing should be dispensed with, and instead interpret what's going on as a signal. What is the message underneath? And oftentimes this is absolutely the case when speaking with students in particular, or people who come into our Discord server. Having a state of anxiety, an anxiety disorder as it's called, or recurrent panic attacks or whatever, is often the invitation for someone to begin to discover themselves in a personal myth individuation sense. You know, usually it takes stimulus to begin that process, and everyone's come out the other side feeling not only better without their anxiety, but having been initiated on a journey in a way. And, you know, I'll just leave that there, sitting there, as something quite romantic, really, to be, okay, maybe there's meaning in this in hindsight. Not that one should suffer, not that there's by default meaning in suffering, but you do have the power to interpret that signal and to get things sorted out. That's what your psyche wants. It's what psychobiology wants, adaptation. That's a good suggestion. Based on the enormous level of interest in our IPSA professional training course, leading to accreditation as a hypnotherapist and psychotherapist, we are now open to accepting applications to train with us all year round, with the next CADA launching in January 2022. If you're interested in studying to become a professional depth psychologist through Steve and Pauline's psychosystems analysis model, then check out the application process through the link in the description. Thanks.